What if the worst part of your flight wasn't turbulence, but the feeling of being unwelcome just because of the color of your skin? Lisa, a single mother, is standing with her 2 children, Zoe, 12, and Amir, 15, checking in for their long-awaited vacation. They're all smiling, laughing, excited for the trip ahead. The scene feels full of hope and promise. But there's an undercurrent of unease that's almost imperceptible. As they approach the gate, the camera lingers on a flight attendant, Kathy, who briefly looks at them, her gaze lingering just a second too long. Lisa thought today would be different. It was supposed to be an escape, a dream vacation to the beaches of Hawaii, a chance to relax and unwind. But what she didn't expect was to be confronted with something far darker than a missed flight or bad service. What she didn't expect was to be treated as if they didn't belong there just because of who they were. Welcome to Black and Slain Stories, where we share powerful, real stories that shed light on the realities of racial injustice and give a voice to the unheard. If you believe in equality, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and comment below, because your support helps us bring stories like this to the forefront. We tell stories of courage, resilience, and the fight for dignity in a world that often overlooks the truth. Stories that highlight the strength of those who refuse to back down in the face of injustice. Today's story is no different. It's about a family, Lisa, her children Zoe and Amir, facing racial profiling on a flight. But it's also a story about resilience, about standing tall, and about how a family can inspire a movement that reaches far beyond an airport terminal. Lisa had worked hard for this trip. The last few months had been rough, balancing work and taking care of the kids. This vacation was supposed to be a chance to escape, to recharge. But today, something was different. Something was wrong. It's funny how the world can feel so big, yet when you're treated a certain way, it can make you feel like the walls are closing in. For Lisa and her kids, this was supposed to be a moment of peace. But from the moment they approached the gate, things felt off. They stood at the check-in counter, and Kathy, the gate agent, gave them a polite but strangely cold smile. She asked for their boarding passes. But the moment she looked at them, Lisa could see the subtle change in her demeanor. Kathy's eyes flicked to her manager and then back at Lisa. It was a quick moment, barely noticeable, but it made Lisa feel uneasy. Lisa thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. After all, there were a lot of passengers to manage. But then, as they made their way to the gate, the same cold stare from Kathy followed them. Lisa couldn't shake it. Why were they being watched so closely? As they approached the boarding gate, Lisa's heart sank. She watched Kathy pass their row, again, without even acknowledging them. The flight attendants were moving down the aisle, serving other passengers, but Lisa and her children were ignored completely. Zoe innocently, "Mom, why are we always last?" Lisa, forcing a smile, masking her discomfort, "I'm sure they're just getting to us. Honey, don't worry, we'll be fine." But Lisa's voice lacked the usual confidence. Her instincts were telling her something was wrong. Finally, it was time to board the plane. Lisa, Zoe, and Amir were among the last to get on. As they reached the gate, Kathy handed them their boarding passes. But this time, she hesitated. The same look. Lisa knew it wasn't just about a mistake. It was deliberate. They were being targeted. Lisa stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. She tried to brush it off. But this wasn't a coincidence. She had seen the way Kathy had looked at them from the moment they walked in. Something wasn't right. As they boarded the plane, Lisa caught sight of the flight attendants' reactions. They exchanged glances, talking to each other quietly as they walked past her family's row. There was no greeting, no smile, just cold indifference. Lisa's instincts were right. She didn't know how or why it was happening, but she felt it. This was different. They were being singled out, and it wasn't just a mistake. It was something far more insidious, racial profiling. The moment Lisa and her children stepped into the cabin, a sense of anticipation rushed over her. This wasn't just any flight. This was their opportunity to finally unwind, to forget the stresses of everyday life. The luxurious first-class seat seemed like the perfect place to relax, and Lisa had worked hard to make this vacation happen. It was her way of giving her children something special. But the warm glow of the cabin quickly began to feel colder as she walked down the aisle, guided by a flight attendant who had barely acknowledged her. Lisa, thinking to herself with a hint of unease, why is she looking at us like that? It's just a flight. What's the big deal? She pushed the thought aside and continued walking, but her instincts were beginning to stir. There was something off about the way she was being treated. It wasn't overt, nothing she could put her finger on, but the feeling grew as they approached their seats. Lisa watched as other passengers got the full attention of the flight attendants. Smiles exchanged, drinks served with friendly conversation. Lisa had been flying first class for years, but today felt different. This wasn't the service she was used to. She guided Zoe and Amir to their seats, ensuring they were comfortable, adjusting their seatbelts, and getting settled for the long flight. She noticed Zoe's excitement as she looked at the in-flight entertainment screen, while Amir, being a teenager, was already scrolling through his phone, his face buried in his headphones. Lisa couldn't help but smile at the normalcy of the moment, but her sense of unease lingered. Lisa, whispering to herself, trying to push the thought away. This is supposed to be a vacation, Lisa. Don't overthink it. Just relax. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. As the seatbelt sign flickered off, Lisa noticed the flight attendants moving down the aisle. They made eye contact with every passenger in their row, offering drinks and snacks. Lisa sat still, waiting for her turn, a soft smile on her face as she imagined the moments of relaxation ahead. But the moment passed. The flight attendants passed over their row without even a glance. A small, subtle thing, but to Lisa, it felt like a heavy weight settling in her stomach. She turned her head to look at Amir and Zoe, who were both unaware, absorbed in the small distractions of their own worlds. Lisa, softly to herself, maybe they're busy. It's probably nothing. She tried to dismiss it, but the feeling remained. She looked at the aisle again. Kathy, the flight attendant from the gate, was now passing by, again ignoring their row. This time, Lisa felt a sense of recognition, and something darker began to settle in. Lisa forced herself to stay calm. She had to be strong for her kids. But it was difficult to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. It wasn't just a missed drink or snack. It was the way Kathy moved down the aisle, actively avoiding them. This wasn't a mistake. This was an accident. Kathy had noticed them. She had seen them, and yet she chose to skip their row. Lisa shifted in her seat, her mind racing. Was this intentional? Finally, the moment came when the drink cart rolled toward their row. Lisa, trying to maintain her composure, sat up a little straighter, her hand moving toward the armrest. But just as Kathy approached, she turned away, focusing on the other passengers. It felt like a slap in the face. Lisa could feel her hands begin to tremble, a cold wave of frustration washing over her. She turned to Amir, who had noticed by now. Amir, frowning, looking at the cart as it passed them. Mom, why didn't they stop? Lisa, forcing a smile, but her voice laced with confusion. I'm sure they'll come back. Don't worry about it, baby. But Amir's eyes were now on Kathy, who had moved down the aisle, continuing her service to everyone else, but once again skipping their row. It was becoming clearer now. Too clear. The situation was escalating, but Lisa didn't want to cause a scene, not yet anyway. She glanced at Zoe, who seemed completely unaware of the tension building in the cabin. Zoe, blissfully lost in her own world, asked, "Are we there yet?" Lisa forced another smile. She wanted to shield them from what was happening, but her patience was running thin. Lisa, softly, under her breath, to herself, why are they doing this? Why are we being treated differently? Just as she was about to stand up, ready to demand an answer, the second flight attendant, another woman named Rachel, approached with the drink cart. Lisa knew this was her chance. She wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. Lisa, steadily, looking Rachel in the eye. Excuse me, I've been waiting for my drink. Can you tell me why you passed over us? Is there a reason? Rachel's eyes flickered with hesitation. She glanced down at her cart, her lips parting as if to respond, but she didn't speak right away. The air between them thickened, and Lisa felt her heart race in anticipation. Rachel nervously, looking down at the cart, not meeting Lisa's gaze. "I am sorry, ma'am. We're just getting to you." There was a miscommunication in the service line. Lisa, firm, not backing down. "A miscommunication? You've been passing over us. Not once, but twice now. I want an explanation." Lisa stood up slowly, her hand resting on the armrest, eyes locked on Rachel's face. She wasn't going to let this go. The weight of it all was hitting her, the subtle exclusion, the constant avoidance. Lisa, firmly, with rising emotion, "Look at me. I'm not asking for preferential treatment. I'm asking for the same respect you're giving everyone else. My children deserve the same service as everyone else on this flight." Rachel's face turned pale. She glanced down the aisle, clearly unsure what to do next. But the silence from the other passengers in the first-class cabin was palpable. The room felt as if it had collectively held its breath. The tension in the air was undeniable, and everyone in the cabin knew what was happening. Lisa wasn't backing down. She was done being polite, done trying to rationalize this. Her children had been treated like they didn't belong, and she wasn't going to let that stand. Lisa, speaking louder now for all to hear, "I paid for this ticket. My family paid for these seats. And just because of our skin color, we've been treated like we don't belong here. We deserve respect. I demand an explanation." The passengers around them began to shift uncomfortably, some looking at their phones, others pretending not to notice. But the pressure was mounting. Lisa's voice was no longer just a plea. It was a demand for dignity. The flight attendants exchanged quick glances, and Lisa could see the realization beginning to sink in. The situation had escalated from a quiet oversight to something unavoidable. The tension in the cabin had shifted. People were listening now. Some began recording on their phones. The truth of what was happening was now on display for all to see. As Kathy and Rachel hesitated, the plane's captain came on the intercom, his voice suddenly breaking the silence. The situation had reached its boiling point. Lisa was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her children's dignity, for the silent struggle that so many others had faced. Stay tuned. The fight for justice isn't over, and the truth is about to come to light. As the minutes stretched on, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She glanced at her children, who were now playing with their tablet devices, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. But Lisa felt it, an unease that settled deep in her chest, a creeping discomfort she couldn't quite explain, but which had become impossible to ignore. Lisa, to herself quietly, "This doesn't feel right. Something's off." She tried to distract herself, focusing on the in-flight entertainment. But every time she looked up, her gaze would fall on the flight attendants, moving up and down the aisle. They were busy serving the other passengers. Yet, once again, they completely ignored her row. Zoe, looking up from her tablet, curiously, "Mom, why is everyone getting food except us?" Lisa, forcing a smile, trying to remain calm. "Don't worry, sweetie. We'll get ours soon, okay? Just sit tight." But deep down, Lisa knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just about service issues or scheduling errors. This was about being overlooked, treated like they didn't matter, like they didn't belong. And it wasn't just happening with Kathy. All the flight attendants, every single one of them, had passed by their row without so much as a glance. Lisa, thinking, her mind racing, why are we being ignored? Are they doing this because of our skin color? Is it because we're the only black family in first class? Lisa couldn't keep quiet any longer. Her children, happily engrossed in their devices, didn't see the growing unease that was tightening around Lisa's heart. She glanced at Amir, who was still watching a movie on his tablet, but his face had become drawn, his playful expression replaced by a distant look. He could feel it too. It wasn't just the food. It wasn't about a missed snack. This was about the way they were being treated, the way they were being seen, or more accurately, not seen at all. Lisa, softly, to herself, I can't let them do this. Not to my children. The flight attendant moved toward them once more, but instead of stopping at their row, she glanced at them briefly, then moved past, serving the passenger behind them. Lisa's hands tightened around the armrests, the anger building inside her chest, but she kept it buried, just for now. She wasn't going to let her emotions take over, but it was getting harder to remain passive. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, the subtle discomfort from those sitting behind and around her. She could almost hear the whispers, those lingering, uncomfortable glances that were a byproduct of racial profiling, of the belief that black people didn't belong in certain spaces. First class wasn't supposed to be for people like her family. They were supposed to stay in the back, in the cheap seats with the rest of them. Lisa, thinking, voice tight, this is how they treat us? Because of the color of our skin? Not even a meal? Not even the basic respect of a human being. Her thoughts were spiraling, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She couldn't let herself be consumed by anger. Not yet, but she couldn't ignore it either. Not anymore. Lisa shifted in her seat, her eyes darting from Kathy to the other flight attendants. They didn't look at her, didn't even acknowledge her existence. They were busy, very busy, it seemed, with every other passenger except her family. It felt like an intentional oversight, a quiet exclusion. And then it hit her. The look on Kathy's face when they had boarded the plane, the nervous glance when Kathy had handed over their boarding passes. It all made sense now. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a simple oversight. They were being discriminated against. And it wasn't even hidden. It was right there in front of her, as plain as day. As the hours went by, the unease in the cabin only deepened. The flight attendants continued their rounds, passing by the family's row multiple times, each time ignoring them more and more blatantly. It wasn't just Kathy anymore. It was every one of them. Lisa watched as other passengers began to notice. Some of them cast curious glances at the family, but others, those who were too uncomfortable or too used to seeing people like her in the back, ignored the situation. One couple in the row behind them exchanged an uncomfortable look before turning away. A businessman across the aisle kept his eyes on his laptop, pretending he hadn't noticed a thing. The only person who seemed to pay attention was the man sitting by the window in a row in front of Lisa. His eyes kept flicking to her family, his gaze lingering just long enough for Lisa to catch it, before quickly looking down at his book. The humiliation was becoming unbearable. The longer the flight continued, the more Lisa felt like a ghost, invisible to everyone except the people who were treating her family like they didn't matter. They were black, and that was all it took. That's why they weren't being served. It wasn't because of the seating mix-up or an error in service. It was because the airline staff had decided they weren't worthy of the same treatment as everyone else. Her hands were shaking now, and it wasn't from the turbulence. It was the injustice of it all. Lisa had seen this before, in stores, in restaurants, in everyday life. But she had never expected it on an airplane, not in first class, not in a place where she had paid good money to be treated with respect. Zoe leaned over to her mom again, her face filled with innocence and confusion. Zoe, softly, "Mom, are we going to get our food soon? I'm hungry." Lisa, looking down at her daughter, voice tight, but tried to remain calm. "I'm sure we will, baby, just a little bit longer." But deep down, Lisa knew that this wasn't about food. It was about something far deeper. Zoe's question, innocent as it was, cut through Lisa's patience like a knife. Her children shouldn't be asking these kinds of questions. They shouldn't have to wonder if the food would come. They shouldn't have to experience what it felt like to be invisible in a space they had every right to be in. Lisa, to herself, voice shaking slightly, "This isn't right. This isn't right." By now, Lisa had reached the breaking point. She wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. She wasn't just a passenger on this flight. She was a mother, a woman who had worked tirelessly to provide for her children, and she wasn't going to let them be disrespected like this. Lisa stood up slowly, her body trembling but resolute, her eyes locked onto flight attendant, who had just walked past them yet again. Her hand gripped the armrest as she took a step toward the aisle, her mind made up. She wasn't going to be silent. "Lisa," voice firm but emotional, "Excuse me, Kathy. Why didn't you serve us? Why is everyone else getting food, but we're being ignored?" The entire cabin seemed to freeze. The flight attendants stopped, their eyes shifting uncomfortably as Lisa's voice rang out, loud and clear, in the quiet hum of the airplane. And in that moment, Lisa knew the battle had just begun. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up. Her knees felt weak, but she straightened her back, determined. The flight attendant, Kathy, had walked past their row again, this time with a slightly quicker step, avoiding even the briefest glance toward Lisa and her children. She wasn't just ignoring them. She was actively avoiding them. The moment Kathy's back turned, Lisa knew this couldn't go on any longer. Lisa, thinking, with a rising sense of frustration, "I've had enough. I'm not letting this go. Not anymore." The plane's hum seemed to fade as Lisa stepped into the aisle, her voice rising above the soft murmurs of the passengers around her. It wasn't a shout, but the tone was firm, unwavering. Lisa, calling out, her voice steady but forceful. "Excuse me, Kathy. Can I talk to you for a second?" The flight attendant didn't turn around at first, but Lisa could see her shoulders tense. Kathy's eyes briefly flickered toward her, but instead of approaching, she took a small step back, as if trying to avoid further confrontation. The silence in the cabin was deafening now. The other passengers could feel it too. Something was about to happen, something that could no longer be ignored. Kathy, hesitating, voice tight. I'm sorry, ma'am. We're just getting to your row. Please, just have a seat and we'll get to you as soon as we can." Lisa's chest tightened, but she refused to back down. The polite tone in Kathy's voice didn't mask the discomfort that Lisa could see behind her eyes. This wasn't a simple service oversight. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Kathy wasn't just skipping their row by accident. She was choosing to ignore them, as if they didn't belong. Lisa, voice growing firmer, refusing to back down. "Don't lie to me, Kathy. You've passed us twice now without so much as a glance. What's going on here?" The aisle seemed to get narrower. Lisa stood her ground, her body facing Kathy as the flight attendant turned to face her, her hands clenched into fists, but Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her children were watching her closely now, their wide eyes filled with confusion. Zoe had stopped playing with her tablet, and Amir had removed his headphones, his gaze locked on Lisa. They could sense it. Something was wrong. Lisa, speaking louder now, for all to hear. "You can't just skip us like this. I know exactly what you're doing. My family deserves the same treatment as everyone else on this flight. Why are you ignoring us?" Kathy's face reddened slightly, her gaze shifting nervously toward the back of the plane. She was trapped now. There was no easy way out. She had to explain herself, but she couldn't, not without revealing the truth. Kathy, hesitating, voice defensive. "It's just protocol. We're getting to everyone. Please, calm down. We're busy." But Lisa was done with excuses. She was done with the polite explanations and the silent mistreatment. "Lisa," voice rising, unrelenting. "No, this is more than just protocol. You're treating us like we don't belong here. We've been ignored on this entire flight, and it's because of who we are." Kathy's eyes flicked to the other passengers, her face now showing a mix of discomfort and defensiveness. The other passengers were watching the confrontation closely, some glancing nervously, others growing increasingly aware of the situation. Lisa's children were silent, their faces now a mix of confusion and worry. Zoe's lip trembled slightly, but she tried to stay brave. Amir's brow furrowed, but his gaze was fixed on Lisa. He was looking to her for strength. Lisa's heart broke for them, but she couldn't stop now. She had to show them that they could stand up even when it seemed impossible. Lisa, voice firm, cutting through the tension. "You're treating us like we're invisible, Kathy. We paid for these seats, just like everyone else. And yet, you've ignored us, treated us like we don't matter." The other passengers were beginning to notice. Some had pulled out their phones, discreetly filming the confrontation. Lisa knew that once the truth was out there, it would be impossible to ignore. She wasn't just standing up for herself and her children. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't matter. Passenger, from behind, speaking out. "Hey, that's not right. You can't just skip them. They're customers, too." Lisa's eyes briefly shifted toward the voice. A few passengers were starting to speak up now. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The safety of anonymity was fading, and people were beginning to see the injustice unfolding. Kathy, visibly shaken, took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the car handles so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She glanced back at the cabin, at the crew members behind her, who seemed to be waiting for some kind of signal. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm just doing my job. I didn't mean to make anyone upset. Lisa, cutting her off, voice full of fire. Don't give me that. You didn't just make me upset. You treated us like we were invisible, like we didn't belong here, and that's not okay. Lisa felt the eyes of the passengers on her now. Some were whispering, some watching in stunned silence, but there was no going back. She had taken the first step. The air around them was thick, a moment of truth that couldn't be ignored. Lisa, louder now, her voice carrying through the cabin. This is more than just a meal. This is about dignity. This is about respect. And you're not going to treat my family like we don't exist. Kathy, hesitating, looking toward the cockpit, as if waiting for instructions. I'll call security. But Lisa wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let fear or intimidation take over. She had a right to be there, just like everyone else. And if it meant calling attention to the injustice, then so be it. The passengers around her began to shift uncomfortably. Some spoke out, voicing their support for Lisa, while others sat in silence, too scared to intervene. But the silence was beginning to break. Lisa was no longer alone in this fight. As Kathy walked away to call security, the passengers around Lisa looked at her, some offering quiet words of encouragement. Others pulled out their phones, starting to record. The moment was no longer just a small act of defiance. It was becoming a statement, one that would ripple out far beyond this flight. Lisa stood there, heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had made a decision, and now she was going to see it through. She wasn't just demanding service. She was demanding dignity. The plane had been in the air for nearly an hour now, but the mood inside the cabin felt as though it had been grounded for much longer. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the physical discomfort being ignored, but also the emotional weight of the disrespect that had settled into the air between her family and the crew. As the seatbelt sign flickered on, the engines rumbled, and a soft turbulence began to stir the cabin. The plane dipped slightly, causing the overhead lights to flicker briefly, casting a brief shadow over Lisa's face. But it wasn't the turbulence that made her stomach churn. It was a deep, unsettling feeling that what had started as an innocent flight was now turning into something much darker. Zoe clutched the armrest, her eyes wide as the plane rocked slightly. She looked at her mom, her lips trembling. Zoe softly, "Mom, I don't like this. I'm scared." Lisa, gently, trying to soothe her, "Sweetheart, it's just a little turbulence. The plane's fine. Just take a deep breath." But deep down, Lisa knew the turbulence wasn't the only thing shaking her. It wasn't just a gentle rocking of the plane that rattled her. It was the deep, unsettling knowledge that something wasn't right, that this wasn't just an accident, and that they weren't being treated like the other passengers. The flight attendants' deliberate avoidance, the glances of passengers. It all felt like a storm was brewing, one that would soon break wide open. Lisa tried to stay calm, glancing over at Amir, who had his headphones on, his face slightly more relaxed now. He was used to the turbulence, accustomed to the minor bumps of flying, but even he seemed more withdrawn today. The tension in the cabin wasn't just from the turbulence. It was palpable, like a tight knot in the pit of her stomach. And it was getting worse. The flight attendants continued to pass by them, now moving swiftly with their carts, serving the other passengers, but once again, skipping over Lisa and her children. It was as if they were invisible, as though they didn't belong in first class. Lisa's patience was beginning to wear thin, and though she tried to keep it together for her children, the quiet sting of rejection was becoming impossible to ignore. Her eyes followed the flight attendants, her gaze hardening as Kathy and another attendant, Rachel, moved down the aisle. The two exchanged glances as they passed, their conversation a soft murmur, but there was no doubt in Lisa's mind now. This was no accident. Lisa, thinking, anger rising. They've done it again. This isn't right. Why are we being treated like this? The turbulence seemed to intensify slightly as the plane rocked again. Lisa's grip on the armrest tightened. She felt her chest constricting, the frustration building inside her. She had tried to be patient, to let it go, but now the anger was bubbling over. She knew she couldn't stay silent. The plane dipped again, and Zoe let out a small gasp, clinging to her seat. Lisa turned to her daughter, offering her a reassuring smile, though it felt like she was only convincing herself. Lisa, trying to comfort Zoe, voice soft but firm. "It's okay, baby. It's just a little bump in the air. We're safe." But her words felt hollow, because Lisa didn't feel safe. Not in this plane. Not with the flight attendants treating her like she wasn't worthy of a meal, a drink, or even a basic acknowledgement. They were being ignored because of something she couldn't change, the color of her skin. As the flight attendants began to prepare for the meal service, Lisa watched them closely, her mind racing. Kathy and Rachel began to approach the back of the plane, handing out trays to the passengers. But this time, Lisa was ready. She was no longer going to sit in silence. Lisa stood up abruptly, her children startled by the motion. Amir looked up, his face filled with concern, but Lisa wasn't backing down. Amir, concerned, low voice. "Mom, what's going on?" Lisa, forcing a calm smile, but her voice trembling. "Stay here, baby. I just need to talk to them." She moved down the aisle, her steps deliberate, her heart pounding. As she approached the flight attendants, she noticed Kathy stiffen, her eyes flicking quickly to the side. Rachel was already busy serving another passenger, but Lisa could see the unease on their faces as she approached. "Excuse me, Kathy. Why did you pass us over again? My family has been ignored 3 times now. We're in first class, just like everyone else. We deserve the same service." Kathy paused for a moment, her eyes darting to Rachel before returning to Lisa. Lisa could feel the tension in the air, the heavy silence between them, and the eyes of the passengers watching. Kathy, defensive, trying to hide her discomfort. "We're just getting to you. There's no need to cause a scene, ma'am. I'll get to you soon." But Lisa wasn't backing down. She'd heard this excuse too many times before. It wasn't just about the meal. It wasn't just about being overlooked. This was about respect. Lisa, louder, demanding. "You can't keep passing us over. My children are hungry, and I paid for these seats. You have no right to treat us like this." The flight attendants exchanged another glance, but this time it was different. Rachel spoke up, her voice quieter but still firm. Rachel, hesitating. "Ma'am, please sit down. There's no reason to escalate this. We're doing our job." But Lisa wasn't listening anymore. She was done being polite. The entire plane was silent now, and she could feel the weight of the moment. She had no intention of backing down, and this wasn't just for her. It was for her children, and for everyone who had ever been treated like they didn't belong. Lisa, raising her voice, now fully emotional. "No, I will not sit down. I will not be ignored. This is racial profiling, and I won't let you do this to my family." The flight attendants froze. A few passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to record. Kathy and Rachel exchanged a quick, unsure glance. This was no longer just about a meal. It had become something bigger. The whole cabin knew it now. Lisa's heart was racing, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She was done being silent. The turbulence shook the plane once more. But this time, it wasn't the only thing rattling Lisa. The flight attendants finally seemed to realize they couldn't continue ignoring her. Kathy moved quickly down the aisle, but this time, Lisa wasn't going to let it go. She was going to be heard, no matter what. "Lisa," eyes locked on Kathy, "you have no right to treat us like this. We're here, we've paid for this ticket, and we won't be treated like we don't exist." It was a small stand, one that started with a quiet voice, but would end in something much bigger. The plane wasn't just flying to its destination. It was flying toward a moment of truth, one where Lisa and her family's dignity was on the line. But now, Lisa was fighting for respect, for justice, and she wasn't going to let them take that from her. The cabin was eerily quiet after Lisa's outburst. The sound of the plane's engines hummed in the background, but inside the first-class cabin, it felt as if the world had paused for a moment. Lisa stood in the aisle, her body rigid with frustration, her heart still pounding in her chest. The flight attendants had retreated, and the passengers around her, who had previously been so indifferent, were now watching her every move. Lisa, thinking to herself, what just happened? Did I really just stand up to them? This can't be happening. I've done nothing wrong. But Lisa's mind wasn't focused on the past few minutes. Her children's faces were etched in her thoughts. Zoe's confusion, Amir's worry, those were the things that mattered now. She had to stay strong for them, to show them that standing up for what's right was never easy, but always necessary. Zoe whispering wide-eyed, Mom, why is everyone staring at us? Lisa, forcing a smile, trying to sound calm but her voice trembling. Because, baby, sometimes when you stand up for yourself, people notice. But don't worry, we're going to be okay. Lisa wanted to reassure her children, to tell them everything would be fine, but she couldn't shake the growing unease in her chest. The flight attendants' dismissive behavior, the way they had deliberately ignored her family, she couldn't let it go. The anger was still there, simmering just below the surface, but she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do next. The tension in the air felt so thick it could be cut with a knife. The other passengers around them hadn't moved. Some were still looking over at her family, glancing at their phones, the recording devices now visible in some hands. Others were avoiding eye contact, pretending they hadn't witnessed the confrontation, as if to distance themselves from the uncomfortable truth that was unfolding before them. Amir, quietly to Lisa, Mom, why aren't they helping us? Why isn't anyone saying anything? Lisa's heart sank as she looked at her son's face. The vulnerability in Amir's eyes struck her deeply. She had worked so hard to shield him and Zoe from this kind of world, but now they were both forced to confront it head-on. The world wasn't going to protect them. They had to protect themselves. Lisa took a deep breath and stood up a little straighter, fighting the emotional storm that was brewing inside her. She couldn't let her children see her break down. She had to show them that standing up for what was right didn't always look pretty. It wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. It was about knowing that their voices mattered. Her eyes scanned the cabin. Some passengers continued to glance in their direction, but most were now focused on their own devices, pretending the moment hadn't happened. Lisa's eyes narrowed, her gaze moving from one face to another. She had seen this look before. It was the silent complicity of bystanders. People who knew what was happening was wrong, but were too uncomfortable to speak up. Lisa, to herself, quietly but fiercely, Not today. Not anymore. They're not going to make us feel small. They're not going to ignore us. Zoe, softly nervous. Mom, I don't want them to be mad at us. I don't want to make them angry. Lisa, taking Zoe's hand, voice soft but firm. No one's angry, sweetheart. We're just standing up for ourselves. We don't let people treat us like this. The turbulence outside had started again, but it wasn't the plane's movement that had Lisa feeling off balance. It was the emotional weight of everything happening inside the cabin. As the plane rocked, Lisa stood up once more, looking around the passengers, feeling the weight of their gazes. But this time, she wasn't going to stand alone. She stepped into the aisle and addressed the nearest passenger, a middle-aged woman sitting across from them, who had been watching the confrontation with an uneasy expression. Lisa, calm but resolute. Excuse me, ma'am. Can I ask why no one is standing up for us? Why is it okay for them to treat us like we don't belong here? The woman blinked, caught off guard by Lisa's direct question, but didn't answer immediately. She looked at her husband sitting next to her, exchanging a brief, uncomfortable glance. Passenger, awkwardly, shifting in her seat. I didn't see anything happen. I don't know what to say. Lisa, voice steady, demanding. Look at me. Look at us. We're here just like everyone else, and we deserve the same respect. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equality. The tension in the cabin started to shift. The murmurs from the other passengers grew louder as more people began to take notice. Lisa noticed a young woman, probably in her 20s, standing up from her seat, walking over to Lisa's row. The woman's face was kind but determined. She looked at Lisa with a quiet but noticeable nod of solidarity. Young woman, softly, voice supportive. You're right. This isn't right. I saw what happened, and I'm with you. Lisa, surprised but grateful. Thank you. That means a lot. Suddenly, it wasn't just Lisa fighting. The young woman's support seemed to ignite something in others. The man sitting across from them, who had been avoiding eye contact, slowly put down his phone and looked at Lisa. He didn't say anything, but his expression had shifted from indifference to quiet understanding. Lisa, voice rising, louder now. We're not going to let them treat us like this. Not today. Not ever. They won't pretend they didn't see it. But the truth is, we're all witnesses. This isn't just about what happened to us. It's about what happens every single day to families just like mine, to people who are made to feel invisible. I won't let that happen to us anymore. By now, the cabin was fully aware of the situation. The entire first-class section was listening, some leaning forward in their seats, others looking directly at Lisa, their eyes now filled with the same anger and frustration that had been boiling in her heart. Passenger, from across the aisle, standing up in quiet support. I've been watching this happen. It's not right. Lisa turned to look at him, and for the first time in what felt like hours, she saw solidarity, a real recognition that what had happened wasn't just an isolated event. This wasn't just about one family. This was about everyone who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. Lisa's voice softened, but the strength in it was undeniable. She had taken her stand, and now the flight attendants couldn't ignore the truth. Lisa, calm but empowered. This isn't just about me. This is about us. This is about dignity and respect. It's time for things to change. The cabin had grown quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was one of understanding, of awareness. Lisa had made her point, and though she didn't know what the next steps would be, she knew she wasn't alone. Lisa, to herself, softly yet resolute, we're going to make this right. We'll fight for our dignity. We won't be ignored. But Lisa didn't need the captain's announcement to distract her. She was standing tall now, her shoulders back, as the weight of the moment sank in. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to let this go. This wasn't just about the meal. It was about their dignity, about standing up to the unjust treatment they had been subjected to since they boarded. The camera focuses on Lisa's determined expression, her voice growing louder, her tone sharper, and the passenger support building. Lisa, calm but fierce. I'm not asking for anything special. I'm asking for what we deserve. And right now, what we deserve is the same treatment as every other passenger on this flight. It was happening. Slowly but surely, Lisa was shifting the narrative. The flight attendant's stonewalling had cracked, and now there was a catalyst for change. Kathy's defensive attitude had begun to waver. Her eyes darted around, looking for support, but none came. Rachel was silent, and the other flight attendants were beginning to look at each other, realizing that they were no longer in control of the situation. Then, one of the passengers, a man seated in business class, stood up and walked toward the front of the plane. Man, with quiet resolve. I've been flying for years. I've never seen anything like this. This needs to stop. The wave of support continued to grow, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Lisa could feel the tide turning. The passengers had seen the truth, and they weren't going to stand by in silence any longer. Lisa, firm with growing hope. This isn't over. It's not just about today. It's about making sure this never happens again. This is the fight we have to keep fighting. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. The turbulence had subsided, but a new kind of tension hung in the air. The plane's descent began and the seatbelt signs flickered on, but inside the cabin, it was as if the world had stopped moving. The atmosphere was thick, the silence almost suffocating. Lisa, thinking to herself, voice low, we've made it this far. We've stood up, but I can't stop now. We need justice. Her children sat quietly beside her, Amir still looking out the window, but Zoe, her small hand gripping her mother's, could sense the heavy air around them. Zoe, whispering softly, nervously, Mom, are we really going to be okay? Lisa, with a reassuring smile, but her voice shaking slightly. Yes, baby, we're going to be just fine. But even as she spoke those words, Lisa's mind was racing. This was only the beginning. Standing up to the flight attendants had felt empowering, but now, the reality of the consequences began to sink in. What would happen when they landed? Would the airline take responsibility for what had happened, or would they try to sweep it under the rug? As the plane touched down, the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin once again, signaling their arrival. But this wasn't just another landing. It was a landing. The flight attendants had been avoiding them, but the time for avoidance was over. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. Kathy and the other attendants had seen the support that had emerged for Lisa and her family. Now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The plane slowed to a halt at the gate, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain, calm, but with an air of finality. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at our destination. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been turned off. We'll be taxiing to the gate momentarily." But Lisa's thoughts were miles away. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Her fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The confrontation had caused a stir. But Lisa knew that unless they made a stand right now, unless they demanded accountability, the injustice would go unchallenged. Lisa stood up as the plane's wheels touched the ground. She couldn't sit idly by anymore. She had taken her stand before, but now, with the landing imminent, she wasn't going to let the airline walk away without facing the consequences. The plane had stopped, but her fight for justice wasn't anywhere near finished. Lisa, looking at Amir and Zoe, voice firm, "Stay close to me, kids. We're not done yet. We've made our point, but we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. No one is walking away without taking responsibility." Zoe looked up at her mother, her eyes wide but filled with trust. Amir, who had grown quiet, nodded and stood by his mother's side. They could sense it too, the weight of the moment. They had been through so much already, and now the end of this journey would be the beginning of something bigger, something more important. As the plane's doors opened and the passengers began to gather their belongings, Kathy was nowhere to be seen. The flight attendants had disappeared into the galley, avoiding eye contact with the passengers. Lisa's heart pounded as she watched the door open. She didn't know what to expect when they stepped off the plane, but she knew she wouldn't let this go quietly. Lisa, voice firm to her children, "Stay with me. We're walking out together. We're not letting them sweep this under the rug." As they made their way toward the terminal, the family was stopped by an airport security guard who had been standing by, waiting at the gate. His expression was neutral, but there was a slight hesitation in his eyes. Security guard, calmly, "Ma'am, if I could have a word with you, please." Lisa's stomach dropped. She wasn't sure what was coming next, but she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Lisa, resolute, without hesitation. "Are you here to back up the flight attendants? Or are you here to listen to what's actually going on?" The guard blinked, looking uncertain. The passengers who had witnessed the incident began to gather near the exit, their attention focused on Lisa and the security guard. Some whispered among themselves. Others recorded the scene on their phones. It was becoming clear to everyone that something was about to happen. Security guard, pausing, then looking at Lisa directly. "I'm not here to cause any trouble, ma'am, but I need you to come with me." Lisa felt the tension in the air. This wasn't just about the flight anymore. This was about accountability. The silent complicity of the passengers had shifted into something more. Some were watching, some are filming, and some are beginning to speak up. "She's right. This isn't just about a meal. This is about how you're treating her family. They're being ignored just because of the color of their skin." The words echoed through the terminal, and Lisa's heart surged with pride and relief. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. More passengers stepped forward, voicing their support. Passenger, firmly, walking toward the guard. "I've been flying for years, and I've never seen anything like this. They deserve respect, just like the rest of us." Security guard, looking around, realizing the support for Lisa. I'll need to report this." The airport security guard took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. Lisa's eyes met his, and in that moment, she knew they had reached a point of no return. The guard looked down at the ground for a moment, then finally nodded, making eye contact with Lisa. Security guard, voice low, resigned. Okay, I'll take your complaint to the supervisor. This is unacceptable. As the security guard walked away, Lisa's breath slowed, and she finally felt the weight lift from her chest. It wasn't over yet, but this was the moment of change. The family had taken their stand, and now others were starting to take notice. Lisa looked at her children, their faces now filled with relief and pride. They had made it this far. They had stood up for themselves, for what was right, and now they had the support of others around them. The fight wasn't over, but this moment marked the beginning of something bigger. Lisa, softly, to her children, "We did it. We made sure they heard us, and we won't let them forget it." As they left the plane and made their way through the terminal, the family walked together, their heads held high. This wasn't just about what had happened on the plane. It was about fighting for what's right and about demanding change. It was about making sure that no one would ever have to endure the kind of treatment they had faced. The fight for justice had only just begun. The plane had finally landed, but Lisa's heart still raced. The sound of the terminal, footsteps, overhead announcements, luggage wheels rolling along the floor, felt like a distant hum. Lisa, Amir, and Zoe made their way off the plane, and though the doors of the aircraft had opened, the weight of everything that had happened still felt like it was trapped inside the cabin. The tension from the flight hadn't left. It was like they were still suspended in that moment, standing on the edge of something bigger than they could understand. Lisa, to herself, voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "We're really doing this. We've done this. We've stood up." As they stepped into the terminal, the security guard who had spoken to them earlier approached them again, this time with a different demeanor. His steps were slower, his shoulders slumped, as if he had just come to terms with the weight of what had happened. Security guard hesitating, voice more composed. "Ma'am, I've escalated the issue. I reported what happened to the supervisor. They'll handle it." Lisa, looking him directly in the eyes, with quiet resolve. "Thank you. We're not backing down. Not now, not ever. We have every right to be treated with respect." As Lisa spoke those words, she could feel the power of them. The tension in the terminal was still palpable, but it had shifted. The flight attendants had seen the reality of their actions, and the witnesses in the cabin had made it clear that what happened couldn't be ignored. Behind them, some passengers were already on their phones, writing down what had happened, sharing it on social media. It felt like the world was watching, and Lisa knew that the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. Zoe, nervously but looking up at Lisa. "Mom, is it really over?" Lisa, forcing a smile, her voice soft. "Not yet, sweetie. But we're not going to let them forget us. We'll make sure of it." They reached the terminal's lobby, where Lisa was met by a supervisor from the airline, a tall man in a suit who looked more professional than apologetic. His face was stern, but there was something about his posture that told Lisa he was there because he had to be, not because he wanted to. Supervisor, calm but distant. "Ms. Williams, I'm the one you'll be speaking with. We've received your complaint, and I'll be reviewing the situation." Lisa, without missing a beat, her voice firm. "Review it? You don't need to review it. You need to acknowledge it. My family was treated like we didn't belong here. We paid for first-class tickets, and yet we were treated like second-class citizens. If this had happened to anyone else, I'm sure the response would be different." The supervisor's eyes flickered. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, not by a black woman in a first-class seat. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable under Lisa's unwavering gaze. "Supervisor," shifting uncomfortably, "I understand your frustration, but I need to clarify that this issue will be handled appropriately by our customer service team. I assure you we're looking into it." Lisa, voice rising but calm with authority. "No, you don't understand. We've been ignored, and now you're telling me you'll look into it? This isn't about paperwork. This is about human dignity. We were racially profiled. It's not just an inconvenience. It's an injustice, and you need to acknowledge that right now." Lisa wasn't going to let him brush this off. The words were out there now. Racial profiling, injustice, disrespect. And Lisa could see that the supervisor could no longer pretend it was a misunderstanding. The words were being heard. Others in the terminal were starting to gather around, their eyes on her, some of them nodding in agreement, others pulling out their phones to record. The moment had shifted. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was now a fight for everyone who had been made to feel less than. Supervisor, nervously, trying to regain control. We will address the issue. We will speak with the crew involved and make sure this does not happen again. I'll personally ensure this is taken care of. Lisa, shaking her head, voice unwavering. Words don't fix this. Action does. Lisa could feel her blood pressure rising, but she kept herself in check. She wasn't done yet. She couldn't be done yet. She looked at her children. Amir had his arms crossed, but his eyes were strong, filled with a mix of sadness and pride. Zoe, on the other hand, was clutching her mom's hand tightly, her small face filled with confusion and a bit of fear. But Lisa knew this was a lesson they would never forget. This was a moment where she had shown them that standing up for what's right wasn't just necessary, it was vital. Lisa, softly to herself, "We've done it. We've taken the first step." Lisa felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see the young woman from earlier, the one who had spoken out in support of them during the flight. She was standing behind them, her face filled with empathy. "Young woman, voice kind but determined. I just wanted to say, you were amazing back there. I recorded everything. I made sure to get everything on my phone." Lisa's heart swelled with gratitude. The solidarity of a stranger, someone who had seen the truth and had the courage to speak up, meant more than words could say. It wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about the community of people who were willing to fight for what was right. Lisa, grateful, voice softening. "Thank you. You don't know how much that means to us." Young woman, smiling, voice sincere. "Don't mention it. We all need to stand up, right?" As they walked toward the exit, a sense of relief began to wash over Lisa. She could still feel the eyes on her, but now, instead of the sharp stares of suspicion and exclusion, they were filled with a sense of recognition, solidarity. And with that, she knew this fight wasn't just about one family. This was about standing up for everyone who had been made to feel invisible. They had taken a stand, and now the world had taken notice. The road ahead wasn't easy. The battle for justice had just begun. But Lisa and her family had made their mark. And it was just the beginning of a movement toward equality, respect, and dignity for all. Weeks had passed since that day, the day the Williams family stood up against the racial profiling they faced on the plane. What had started as a routine flight had turned into a battle for dignity, for justice, and for the right to be treated with respect. The emotional scars remained, but so did the sense of empowerment that came with speaking out. Lisa had spent the days after the flight trying to shield her children from the fallout. Zoe was still processing everything, but Amir had grown quieter, more thoughtful. He had always been more reserved of the two, but now there was a quiet strength in his eyes that Lisa recognized. The entire experience had changed them, and it had changed her too. Lisa had been waiting for the airline's response, but she knew it wouldn't come easy. The fight for justice was never simple. A few weeks later, Lisa sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. It was from the airline, and she hadn't been able to bring herself to open it until now. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, pulling the letter from the envelope. As she read the words on the page, her heart skipped a beat. The airline had apologized. They had acknowledged the discrimination that had taken place on that flight. The letter confirmed that Kathy, the flight attendant, had been suspended and an investigation was underway. But it didn't stop there. The airline had also promised to implement new training on racial bias and discrimination for all their employees. They had agreed to donate a significant sum to organizations that fought racial injustice. But the most important part? The public statement. Lisa, whispering to herself, voice trembling, "They've done it. They've actually done it." For the first time in weeks, Lisa felt a sense of relief wash over her. The fight was far from over, but this was a victory not just for her family, but for everyone who had ever been discriminated against, ignored, or dismissed because of their race. In the days that followed, news outlets picked up the story. The incident on the plane became a catalyst for a larger conversation about racial profiling in the airline industry. People shared the Williams family story on social media, offering words of support and calling for widespread change in how black passengers were treated during air travel. Lisa had never imagined that standing up for her family would ignite a movement. She had simply wanted to be treated fairly. But what had happened, what she had started, was much bigger. Lisa, sitting with her children, voice filled with pride. We did it. We made sure the truth came out, and we didn't let them ignore us. Amir, quiet but firm. We stood up, Mom. We fought. Zoe, smiling, looking up at her mom. And we showed them we matter. The repercussions of their stand rippled through the airline industry. Other airlines took notice. There was now accountability. And it wasn't just a gesture. It was real change. Change that was being led by the voices of ordinary people who refused to be silenced. As the days turned into weeks, Lisa realized that her fight was far from over. But the experience had taught her something powerful. Justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created by standing up, by demanding dignity, and by speaking the truth. Her children would never forget the moment they stood up for their rights. They had seen firsthand what it meant to fight for what was right, and they would carry that knowledge with them, no matter where life took them. Lisa, reflectively, smiling at her children, this is just the beginning. We've shown the world what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Our voices matter, and we're going to make sure they always do. Lisa knew that the journey wasn't over, but she felt a renewed sense of strength in her heart. The battle had been difficult, but it was worth it. And now, the truth was finally out. The fight for justice had only just begun.